Welcome to my third video on my Holy Grail series. If you haven't watched the previous two videos, this one might be a little confusing for you, so I would advise you go back and watch the series from the beginning. In the last video, we talked about the Last Supper and where was the Last Supper held. In this video, we want to talk about who most likely owned the home of the Last Supper. You know, they don't give us the name. And you go into the Gospels, there's a very interesting character that's in all four Gospels by the name of Joseph of Arimathea, excuse me. Now, Joseph of Arimathea, it says in all four of these Gospels that Joseph of Arimathea is the person who took Jesus' body off the cross and laid him in a tomb. Now, in all four of these Gospels, it gives descriptions of who Joseph of Arimathea is. Mainly, he's a very affluent, highly influential member of the Jewish council named the Sanhedrin. And if you're not familiar with what the Sanhedrin is, that is the Jewish council made up of the Pharisees, the priests, the scribes, and the Sadducees. Mainly, those are the the movers and the shakers of Jerusalem. Those are all the well-off people and the people who are influencing all the others. You know, you had the Roman governor on top, Pontius Pilate, and then you had the Sanhedrin. And you might remember that the Sanhedrin is the council that plotted to kill Jesus. Now, Joseph of Arimathea is a member of that council. However, in John's Gospel, it tells you that he did not want to partake in that plot and didn't want to kill Jesus. Matthew's Gospel also talks a little bit about during the trial of Jesus that the members tried to look for false witnesses and couldn't find any. And then later they found two. And a lot of scholars believe that that was Joseph of Arimathea that was discounting a lot of the witnesses. So Joseph is a disciple of Jesus. He's a Jew, a very wealthy Jew, and a very influential person. However, he is starting to buy in that Jesus was the Messiah. And there's a lot of things that, by this time, if you witnessed the curtain tearing in the temple and the black sky, he whatever the case, Joseph of Arimathea was already buying into Jesus being the Messiah. Now, Joseph lays Jesus in a tomb. The tomb that Joseph lays him in is the tomb that is Joseph's own tomb that he had prepared for himself. And the gospel describes that this isn't a tomb that someone had already laid in. This is Joseph's new tomb. And Nicodemus helps him in one of the gospels, and some of the women help him in another. So wrapping the body. And it's interesting to see that it's Joseph's linens that wrapped the body of Jesus up. So you could certainly say that most of Jesus's buddies or disciples were not wealthy. They all came from Galilee. It wasn't a very wealthy area. So mainly the disciples weren't wealthy, and the apostles weren't wealthy, and most of the disciples weren't wealthy. The interesting part is Joseph of Arimathea is a disciple of Jesus, and he's extremely wealthy and extremely influential. And how do you know this? He was granted an audience with Pontius Pilate on the day before the Sabbath. During the biggest holiday of the Jewish, of Jerusalem throughout the year, he was given an audience with Pontius Pilate and granted the body of Jesus. So you have to say that, John and James and Peter, they weren't even going to get close to Pontius Pilate to even talk to him. Joseph of Arimathea got the audience and was granted the body. And notice that the Sanhedrin, didn't say much. It doesn't say that, they had a problem with it. The only thing that it does say is they said, well, tell Pontius he's got to put a guard because this guy said he's going to rise up on the third day. But they don't make a stink about him being laid in Joseph's tomb. So that's a very telling thing, too, of how influential Joseph was within the Jewish community or within Jerusalem. So it certainly seems that he could have been the person whose home held or hosted the Last Supper. Where did Joseph end up? So now we go into the legend of where Joseph ended up, because the Bible doesn't go into what happened to Joseph, but legends tells us that he's a very wealthy tin merchant. And he's selling tin throughout the Mediterranean, and he's also selling it to England. And he's taking passage to get to England through France. And now there's a number of sources that say Joseph of Arimathea in 36 AD, 3 years after Jesus had died, got the heck out of Jerusalem mainly because of the persecution, and it's very doubtful that he was still a member. I don't think, I could imagine, these are my own thoughts, I imagine he probably was kicked out after the disciples started saying that Jesus is risen, and this religion started, that it kind of took off like a storm. I would imagine that he would have been one of those people that was probably targeted for death by the Apostle Paul before his conversion. So Joseph ends up in Glastonbury, England. Right? There's a lot of sources that say Joseph is the first person to bring Christianity to England, and he's actually, some historians say he's the first person to build an above-ground church, because all the other ones were in caverns and caves and in homes of people. Joseph is said to have built the first above-ground church. Now, in this story, it's an interesting story because Joseph ends up in Glastonbury, and what we find out is that there's documents that show that there was a merchant given 12 plots of land, 12 hides of land, and a hide being roughly 12 acres. A very telling, interesting number, very biblical number, right? Anyway, whoever was the ruler of this land gave this merchant 12 plots of land for free, and it would be tax-free, right? This is very unusual way of doing business. Here's some land for free, and I'm not going to tax you. Anyway, so there's some legends around that, and there's some documents that show that this merchant in the first century got a ton of land in Glastonbury, England. What did this merchant have, or why was he so influential? No one really knows, right? You have to wonder, why is it that this person, who was already wealthy and probably could have bought the land, and he's already known as a merchant, why was he given the land for free and tax-free? A terrible way to do business if you're ruler of the land. In addition to this, on this land, they build a monastery. And the monastery, peculiar enough, is named the Secret of Our Lord. Now that, again, is a very peculiar thing. You name a monastery the Secret of Our Lord. I would think when anybody else hears that, everybody wants to figure out what is the secret. So yes, the monastery was built. Most people say that it was Joseph of Arimathea who built this monastery and church. Now, you could certainly say that Joseph probably had the Holy Grail, showed it to this king. Maybe this king drank from it. Joseph told him the story. The king gave him all this land. Joseph builds a church and builds a monastery, and they name it the Secret of Our Lord. It certainly seems some fishy stuff going on with Joseph of Arimathea. Now, what happens to Joseph of Arimathea, or what happens to the cup? Where could we follow the cup next? Well, you're just going to have to wait for the next video. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.